Welcome to another episode of Found in the Wild. Today, we're talking about a 1966 Lincoln Continental. Now, this is a series where I take cars found by my friend Stan Nachev, who actually runs a really cool classic car and architecture Instagram account. You can see it here. And I talk about these cars that he finds and go on a deep dive to talk about what kind of car they are, what makes them interesting, and kind of how they fit into the cosmos. Now, what Stan sent me recently is this, a huge Lincoln land boat. Now, this is a really interesting car to me. These are the Kennedy Continentals, and I just think these are so cool. And to talk about these cars, you have to realize where Lincoln was in the 50s and where everyone was in the 50s. And that was just the absolute temple of excess. Think of 1958. Look at a 1958 Lincoln. The 1958 Lincoln was actually the largest unibody car ever made. It's huge. And look at that compared to a 1961 Lincoln Continental. Compared to the 58 designs, there's hardly any chrome. It's got slab sides. The detailing is very, very restrained. And it basically heralded the new design language for Detroit going into, I would say, about 66, 67 when things started to change again. But this is what set the trend. So how did we get a downsized, minimalist Continental from 1958? Well, we actually have to go to the Ford Thunderbird because that's where this whole thing starts. Now, in 1958, Ford was debating for its upcoming 1961 Ford Thunderbird. They were trying to figure out if they should take it back to its sporty roots or if they should go even more upscale and luxurious. So what they did was they had their designers draw up two proposals, an upscale luxurious Thunderbird and a back-to-basics sporty one. Now, the thing is, they liked the design of the upscale one so much that they thought actually if they took it from a two-door to a four-door, it could work as a Lincoln. And that's exactly what they did. And it actually rides on a much modified 1961 Thunderbird chassis. And so because of this as well, it was radically smaller than the car it replaced. Compared to the 1960 Lincoln Continental, it was about a full foot shorter in length, and it shrunk in pretty much every dimension. Now, the Kennedy Continental ran from 1961 to 1969. And the Convertible ran from 1961 to 1967. And these cars are iconic. They were, of course, the car that Kennedy took his last ride in. It was featured in The Matrix. All kinds of music videos have this car. And one of the biggest reasons is its unique body style, which is a four-door hardtop, which was semi-common back then, or a four-door convertible. And that was like the only post-war American four-door convertible I can think of. It's a very rare body style. To make it even more unique, the rear doors open backwards. They're suicide doors, if you will. Now, the reason they did that was because the Lincoln is huge to us now, but actually back then, it wasn't very big. And they considered the rear seat access to be a bit of a problem. And to mitigate that problem, what they did was they had the doors hinge backwards. The idea that even though the door opening for the 1960s America wasn't very large, people would still be able to get in and out very easily. And that gave the car its signature look, which is, the Continental convertible, both doors open, you can look right through the car. It's a very cool feature. But now let's get to the actual car Stan found me. This one is a 1966, and I can tell that from a few things. First of all, we know it's not an earlier car because it has this swage line. How do you spell it? Swage? Swage? Swage. It has this swage line that runs across the body that the earlier slab-sided cars just didn't have. That tells us it's a later car. We also know it's not that new because it still has a hood ornament. 1968 and later models would not have a hood ornament on the front. We can see the mount where a hood ornament used to be. That tells us it is a 66 or a 67. The only way to tell between those 2 years is to look for the Continental star on the front fender. Now, this one is missing its star, but we can see the holes where it used to be, telling us that this car that Stan found is a 1966. And by 1966, the Continental had been growing large again. It had now grown from its original, 213-inch length or so to 220, give or take. This was a big car once again. Now, this 1966 Lincoln Continental is also the first year for the largest Lincoln engine ever made. It has a 462 cubic inch engine. For those of you keeping track at home in metric, that's 7.6 liters, give or take. Now, in that year, 1966, it was rated at 340 horsepower and 485 pound-feet of torque, which is 5 pound-feet shy of a Mopar 426 Hemi. So this was a very big, torquey engine. Not a huge amount of raw horsepower, but clearly just meant to move its raw tonnage around. And tonnage this thing had in surplus. This is a 5,800 pound car. Now I want to talk a little bit more about that engine because it's super unique. This is a 462 cubic inch Mel. That's right, it's the Mel motor. The Mel is Mercury, Edsel, Lincoln. Those are the three brands that use this engine, and it was first introduced in 1958. The Mel is a weirdo. Usually you have your bores that come up and then they mill the deck of the block perpendicular to it like so. But the Mel has a 10-degree slant where the bore meets the deck for mating the heads at a 10-degree angle to the block, which is so weird. And that leads me into my next point, which is that these are some of the most hideously complicated American cars ever made. These things have 6 relays in each rear door because remember how you open a door sometimes and the window will drop down a bit and then you close it and it goes back up? These had that back in 1966, all accomplished with hideously complex vacuum and hydraulic relays. These things are horrifying to restore. They are so difficult. And though this car doesn't look that bad, the amount of work to make that top work again, to make all those vacuum systems work again, the hydraulics work again, it's probably total. This car will probably never come back as a restored car just because these are so complicated. They probably have miles of vacuum lines in the car. And that leads me into my next point, which is that this is a massive car that essentially has no trunk. I mean, it has a trunk, but it's so shallow you would struggle to get a set of golf clubs in it, and with the roof retracted into the trunk, there is absolutely no luggage space at all. So this huge car with top down that takes up 2.5 parking spots has no trunk. And that was actually one of the problems, was this car was frightfully expensive when new. It didn't have any luggage capacity, and it was horrifically complex to maintain. They actually never sold a lot of these. I think Cadillac outsold them like 5-1 in this era, something like that. So it's a really cool car, and it definitely set the tone for styling to come for years because of this car. Now the Continental itself would go on to look a little more tacky each year until the end of its life in 1969 when it kind of just looked like another luxury car. But it was radical when it came out. It set the stage for large American cars for years to come, and I hope someone has the heart, the talent, and the very deep pockets to bring this one back, because I'd like to see it rolling back to its former glory. Nobody talks about the Mel. We should be talking about the Mel.